Yang kinchi widang idawahurangwa sage suayang ratanang panitam nano samangati tatagatina idam pibute ratanang panitam etina sachena suati hotu. In case anyone here has gotten discouraged lately by health issues, world issues, economic issues, educational issues, family issues, so many issues. But remember that there is a path and it leads us through the desert to a most wondrous oasis. And that oasis is nowhere if not within us. So we recollect the Buddha, we recollect his enlightenment, and we have an opportunity to sit together and practice the way the Buddha taught us, and practice for our own awakening, because it is a very strong possibility. And the reason it's possible is because the Buddha was a human being. So lucky we are that we're following the guidance of one who is born in this world like us, had a body like us, had a mind, maybe a little extraordinary mind, we have to say, but nevertheless, we follow the instructions. What did the Buddha ask us to do until the realization of complete awakening? The Buddha did suggest that there are certain things that we can trust. And without trust, without faith in this path and this teaching, in this practice, in this way of developing ourselves, it's very difficult for us to go beyond suffering. So one of the first things that I try to bring to mind when I see how crazy the world is a realm of suffering and non-suffering, and we're in it. But it doesn't make our being in it less precious. The world seems to be degenerating more and more. But in fact, I was contemplating what my parents lived through. And if you look back, there is not a period in history where there were not horrible things going on in the world. There just isn't. And maybe the extent of horror that we're experiencing is because of many factors. One of them is that the population on this planet is greater than it's ever been, very, very much greater. And the amount of social media that people have access to is greater than it's ever been, much, much greater, exponentially greater. We cannot even fathom the difference. I remember a time when there was no such thing as a fax, even a telephone. I remember sitting in front of a TV when I was 5 or 6 years old and being amazed that this thing talked. But now we are so able to access information about every corner of this world and about any number of human beings and the horrors of all their lives and the horrors of all those countries. But if you go back in history, those horrors, maybe not in as great intensity because of the different kinds of weapons, but people chopping off heads is pretty horrible. The nature of the human realm may be horrible, but the nature of the human being is beautiful. This is very important for us to pay attention to, so that we don't get so horrified by the horror that we think that our horror experience is special. But we have the ability to practice knowing horror and knowing the effect of it on the mind, and then protecting ourselves from that, rather than allowing ourselves to indulge in it, feeding on this information over and over again until it destroys our equanimity, our peace of mind. So even if we practice a lot, we have to realize that there are protections that we need to install and return to again and again. All the kinds of suffering, the suffering of old age, sickness, and death, the suffering of our close family members being in trouble or not doing well. We all go through periods of that. Being in danger, like we had here, we had to call the police and make reports and experience the aftermath of that and see the ugliness of the world come right through our doors when we're doing everything in our power to create and sustain a sanctuary of peace and trust here. But the world is not to be trusted. So the Buddha tells us that what is worthy of trust is the knowledge of liberation, awakening, which the Buddha was able to accomplish. We cannot really trust the world or worldly conditions. We cannot therefore trust even the body. Because this body, even though it's attached to us, it doesn't belong to us. It's not who we are. This body arises and ceases. It's impermanent. But we are here in this world, this realm into which we were born, with a certain baggage, a certain backpack full of karmic conditions that we've brought with us through transitions, through we don't know how many countless lifetimes. I'm not asking you to believe that. I'm just suggesting that the karmic load that we have, each of us is different, gives us conditions with which we can work. And the Buddha's teaching helps us to work with those conditions. We are connected. We're energetically sharing this human realm at the same time. And it's a precious human realm because it's impermanent. And because it's impermanent, it's not perfect. And because it's not perfect, it's the perfect laboratory for us to work out our karma in. And the only way to do that is to trust that which is trustworthy. So we trust the Buddha's enlightenment. We trust what is worth knowing, which is that suffering exists. If there was no suffering, would there be compassion in this world? If everything was perfect, if everyone had complete peace, complete food, complete health, lived forever, had everything they needed, everything they wanted, well, then what? What would there be? Would there be enlightenment? Doubt it. Would there be love? I don't know. If everything is so perfect and permanent, then what is precious anymore? Because really, when you think about it, it's because we're not here forever. that love and compassion come about. Just like the flowers on the shrine, if you put plastic flowers on the shrine, they're not beautiful. We never take care of them. They just sit there. You don't have to water them. You don't have to come and check. Are they sick? Do they need a little sprucing up? Gardens, farms, human beings, our pets, all of it, our bodies need care, need attention, need looking after. But if everything was permanent, we would lose that ability to care. So there is suffering, and actually suffering is our teacher. And it is because suffering arises that the heart is moved to feel and care for another, or care for ourselves more, and see, oh, look, this is happening. And we pay attention. And this paying attention is the key to our enlightenment. If we don't pay attention, if we just have it all, we lose our ability to appreciate, to be grateful, to even be generous, because everyone has everything they need. So this human realm, as fraught as it is also like the perfect laboratory for developing very skillful qualities, qualities of immense generosity, qualities of immense love and compassion for one another. But it also has the potential to enable very unskillful qualities, because suffering is there, and those who pick up the world in unhealthy ways are able to inflict suffering, to be cruel, to be violent, to cheat and deceive, to take advantage of, to overpower. If every day the news would tell you about all the care workers who sacrifice their lives to feed people in war zones, but we see all these horror stories and we focus on that. So we have to really look what we pay attention to and what is the effect of that on the mind. And it's really important for us to install protections so that we don't overexpose ourselves. If you overexpose film, then your photograph won't even appear. So if you want to overexpose yourself to horror stories, then your happiness will disappear. So you can practice in those good ways. This is what we try to do here. We're trying to develop noble qualities, stillness in the heart, practicing to transcend the world. So it's really important for us to notice how the hindrances invade the mind, and to do that which helps the hindrances abate. And samadhi is the point at which the hindrances fade. They may not be present, but there's still the suffering of the body. We still have to deal with that. So even if we can keep the mind relatively stable and still in the face of tragedy and hardship, ill health, or the loss of the loved, even the loss of our own life, we have to keep exposing ourselves to mind states that give us the strength to stay present. There are 4 things that we can remember to be able to do that. And one of them is recognizing when the suffering is taking over the mind. Just to know the condition of the mind, to recognize it. It's like you've crossed a line. If you're watching a newscast and you've already seen it and you've already known about that, don't return to it repeatedly, because the mind will get obsessed with that information. We limit our diet you have a special diet because you want to protect your health. Well, there's a special diet for the mind, not to grow the hindrances, but to grow the noble qualities of mind. And it does not include exacerbating the suffering that we're already carrying. We are not able to receive so much information about every other country, every other human being's life, every war, every horror. We need to choose where our attention goes. So first recognize what creates the conditions that your mind is presently in. What are you feeding it? TV, internet? What do we feed the mind? And then limit that. At a certain point in terms of enlightenment, we're still babies. And we need to restrict. That's why we have precepts. To self-mediate or self-parent so that we don't excessively expose our delicate minds, because the mind is so sensitive. It absorbs information and we have to feed it properly, balanced, healthy food, and know its limits. Know what is the limit of this mind. See, what is it that brings you to tears? How many tears do you want to cry? Isn't there enough to cry over? When those people intruded into our sanctuary, it's like somebody coming to attack the goodness. It was really wonderful when we called the police. They were here within minutes and they were so compassionate. We need OPP for our minds so that when we're about to shed tears at the horrors going on in the world, you arrive with the Dhamma police with compassion. The world is full of ignorance. It always was, it is now, and it always will be. That is the nature of the world. That's why we are here. We're here to uphold awakening in the face of ignorance. If there was no ignorance, would we strive to wake up our minds? We can see the value of knowing suffering for what it is and trying to work towards the ending of suffering within our own minds. We cannot end the suffering in anyone else's mind. So recognize the state of the mind, bring in that restriction, reorient our minds to stabilize in terms of our path. So we return to present moment awareness, to clarity about the hindrances, how they are arising and appearing within us, and how can we work with them. We can't stop other people from worrying. We can't stop other people from being violent. We can't stop other people from breaking precepts, but we ourselves can develop a sanctuary in our own hearts, in our own being, and that's what we can trust. This is the practice. In this moment, we feed our minds properly, and then we gain the results of that. And what is the result? We become strong. We have greater compassion. Compassion is the highest benefit of suffering. If we can gain anything from suffering, if we can be generous because of suffering, it's because compassion will result. Wisdom will result. Understanding will result. We will not want to imitate any of that horror in our own lives. We will do anything to avoid harming anyone by body, speech, or mind. Is that not a gift to ourselves and the world? So in the face of terrible suffering, we apply ourselves more and more devotedly intentionally to keeping the mind in a healthy way so that we can be there when someone else comes to you and says, this terrible thing happened to me, or I just got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. We are practitioners. We know how to see the suffering, bring an end to it in our own minds, because it's impermanent. Our minds are not diminished by that suffering. In fact, that suffering helps us to meet whatever else we have to meet within our own bodies, our own death. We're going to watch each other die. We don't know who's going to go first or how or when, but it doesn't matter because we signed up for this. So we can trust our virtue, because if we develop these virtuous qualities by speech and action and virtuous thought, if our minds are completely aiming at purification all the time, we're returning to awareness of what we're doing and what we're thinking, then we are on the path. We're bringing the suffering to an end, moment by moment, because we're thinking thoughts that are skillful and that lead to stillness and peace in the heart, not to horror and fear and disappointment in our leaders. Who is our leader? My leader is the Buddha. The Buddha is my teacher, my doctor, my psychologist, my dietitian. The Buddha's diet is so specific that if we stick to it, we will never fall into despair over what is happening in the world. Instead, we will feel compassion. And if despair begins to arise, we grow our compassion. And for that, we are so blessed. We know the Dhamma and we stay with it. It doesn't mean we won't suffer. But when the suffering arises, we know how to feed the mind properly. And we don't despair at our suffering. We just know it. Oh, dukkha. And we see it arise. It lasts for a while. We chase it out because we reorient our minds to wholesome thought, wholesome reflection, wisely reflecting. I'm a human being. I'm born, I get old, I get sick, and I will die. And in that period of time, may my mind realize Nibbana, which is the ending of suffering, of this attachment, this clinging to a self who believes that the nature of the world will change. If humans are not wise, then this is the kind of action that we will see. But there are so many compassionate and wise human beings in this world. And if we tune into their channels, then we'll be reminded to reflect wisely and practice more and more so that there aren't these gaps. We want to stay in a mind that is focused in practice at all times as much as possible, so that whatever is going on around us, we do what we can to preserve the goodness within us. We keep precepts. We incline our minds towards stillness, towards wisely reflecting, towards compassion, towards letting go what we cannot change and changing what we can. The effect of feeding on the horrors of the world is that the Dhamma within us is eclipsed. It's blackened. And the beautiful thing about the sun is that even if the moon passes right over it and it gets dark, completely dark. What an amazing astronomical thing. But the beauty of the metaphor of the sun is that this Dhamma is like the sun awakening the lotus. So if we keep our minds shining in the direction of Dhamma contemplation, then even if very dark things happen in our lives, even if there's terrible suffering all around us, we will not lose our faith in this Dhamma. Because it is like a sun that ever shines. It is never diminished by all this suffering. In fact, all this suffering gives us the sense of urgency to wake up, to be like that lotus flower that opens no matter what kind of storm is happening around it. And we rejoice in that opportunity. So may we all gain the freedom of the heart so that we can be that sun that is never eclipsed. And we wish other beings well, no matter how much suffering they have, wherever our wholesome thoughts, our prayers, our intentions will land for peace, for goodness to survive, to increase, not to erode in this world. We continue to practice in that way, sending out thoughts of loving kindness and compassion in all directions for the benefit of wherever that will reach. But initially, the benefit will be within our own minds, because we will not be feeding on poison. We will be feeding on sweetness, on goodness, on wholeness, on integrity. So the mind should feed on that which supports the awakening of the mind, not on that which supports depression, disappointment, despair, or fear. And you know what we really fear the most is love. To have unconditional love means that we can love those who cause all this suffering. That must be the most difficult love of all. But if we are like the sun shines on everyone. There is not a creature in this world that the sun does not lend its warmth to when it is shining. That is the awakened mind. It does not differentiate. It does not choose one over another. It just gives light. So I offer that for your reflection tonight.